Okay, let's continue with looking through social issues that would be involved in planning. So let's take economic development planning. This is like a specific field, a subfield of overall urban planning. So if you take a field like economic development planning, how do social issues fit within that framework? And I actually think this kind of whole overall question is kind of interesting. Okay, so here's your scenario. A community needs new jobs, new tax revenues, more tax revenues, but it doesn't have enough sites suitable for commercial development. What that means is there, by sites, like there's not enough parcels of land, like physical land sites that would be big enough or attractive enough for a commercial developer, someone like that can come in and build a shopping mall or come in and build a new office tower, something like that. So the city, your city's in decline. You need new jobs. You need more tax revenues. You need someone to come in and build a whole new office building. Okay, so a solution, since you don't have enough sites available, you could use the power of eminent domain, take land, carry out site preparation, and market the land for commercial use. So seems easy enough. Don't have enough land, go assemble it, sell it off. Okay, so here's one issue. The land contains housing where residents would be evicted and forced to move. The land that you need to assemble. So you're using eminent domain to take their houses away. So what do you do? So what are some of the issues with this? What are the questions you need to ask yourself? So should you go ahead and move forward with the plan, knowing that homeowners will be displaced? What would you do to rehouse them? Would you do anything? Or are you just going to say, oop, eminent domain, we're taking this land, it's for the public good? Um, More questions to ask. Are we talking just a couple of houses are in the way of your project? Or are you going to destroy an entire functioning neighborhood if you move forward with this plan? If you are, if you're going to destroy a whole neighborhood, are the new jobs and the new tax revenues that are going to come as the result of this plan, as the result of this project, are they worth it? Is the benefit worth the cost? So those are some pretty complicated questions to think through. Okay, so let's go even deeper. Let's do this more kind of like ethical, like bigger ideology questions. So here's a scenario. In order to encourage firms to locate in a community, they are often given subsidies or tax breaks as an incentive to come to that community, to come to that city. Um, and what this means, and this is really common, but what it means is that public funds are being given to the entrepreneurs, the investors, the stockholders, the developers, really these stakeholders who are going to be a good deal wealthier than the average taxpayer. So, is this okay? Is this okay to do? Should we be troubled by this? Um, and there's really divides on it. This is what I said. This is a bigger question of kind of how you view the world. Some planners completely okay with it. It's just the idea that this is the way the game's played. This is capitalist America. In our capitalist society, this is what you have to do to be prosperous. It's just the way it works. Completely common, completely acceptable to have these things like these subsidies, these tax breaks. It's things like these low income housing tax credits. It's in New Orleans. I'm sure you've heard there's a tax incentives for the film industry to come do business here. So yeah, some planners totally cool with it. Other planners outraged, think this is wrong, think this is corporate welfare in a negative way. This is totally unfair. So Krumholz, he's the former City of Cleveland planning director. He would be an example of kind of like a more prominent urban planner that is just really thinks this is unethical and wrong and not the way our society should be operating. So yeah, so let's skip to a whole new subject. Environmental justice. If before we kind of ran through this scenario, thinking through some of these kind of social and ethical and justice questions involved in economic development, environmental justice is emerging, is like this really big field. It's getting really popular in urban planning right now. So the central question in environmental justice is whether poor and minorities bear a disproportionate share of the burden of environmental problems? If they are, why is this happening? Um, and answering that question involves this extensive, considerable digging around into the history of the site and its surroundings. Um, we can talk about this in class, and this is New Orleans, and Hurricane Katrina is defining this field a little bit. Right now, it's definitely influencing it. Here at Dillard University, we have the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. So this question, this field, environmental justice, is really important to Dillard right now. The center just got a huge grant too, so these are all good things. But let's think about another scenario, kind of like we did. Okay, like step away from New Orleans. Just think about the scenario is you have a landfill, and it is surrounded by low-cost housing, and it's predominantly minority groups that are living in this low-cost housing that's right next to a landfill. So, what are the questions you're going to ask when I said you have to dig around into the history of the site and its surroundings? Um, was this the result of intentional discrimination in site selection? Was there already this predominantly minority group, low cost housing development, and the political power said, well, we're going to put the landfill there? Is that what happened? Or was it because the residents had little political power to stop what was coming, where they just couldn't advocate for themselves enough to say, don't put it here? Or was it like the site was selected fairly, like the landfill was put in through a fair process. And then what happened? Like, did a landfill get put in and then property values decreased? So over a long period of time, because the property values decreased, the area filled with low income residents. Is that what happened? See, so it's a lot of kind of going back and looking at the particular problem and the history of what happened in that particular location. Transportation planning, a couple issues there. When you're looking at the subfield of transportation planning, you have the history of urban renewal that used eminent domain, that took land to build expressways, to build urban expressways and highway systems. So there's like an unfair history that happened there with transportation. So questions are still going on over the effects that some of those urban renewal projects had on neighborhoods, had on predominantly low income and black neighborhoods. So think about transportation, like the history of segregation issues, the civil rights issues, a lot of them played out in public transportation, right? So transportation is the history of it is kind of marked with these civil rights struggles, these segregation struggles. And kind of stepping away from that, like another way to think about transportation is that how the region's transportation network is structured, it affects people's access to work, to public services. A whole range of lifestyle activities are affected by transportation. So, gender issues. What might that look in planning? So, what's going on? Just kind of an example is in 1997, there's a group of gays and lesbians in planning, GLIP. They formed as a division of the American Planning Association, like the professional organization for planners. So, they formed a group and they said, hey, one goal is recognition of and planning for districts that either commercially or residentially are oriented to gays and lesbians. Some planners think this is divisive because it doesn't fit within the overall framework of planning as being about serving the common good, the public interest. And then on the other hand, some planners were thinking it's about time we're addressing these different issues, these different social issues. And we can talk more about this in classes, just running through a couple different examples. Feminist planning is a whole subfield. So there's a number of planners argue that there's a set of feminist issues that should be and are often not addressed by planning. An attack on suburbs is kind of common, viewing suburbs as places that isolate and exclude women. They talk about the way that suburbs were planned suits the interests of men, not of women. Just as a profession, the field of planning, it's male dominated, literature is written by men, historic figures are men, so that this is going to favor men's interests, not women's. And but another thing that's kind of interesting is how feminist planners, they really say that if you had a city that was laid out by women rather than men, it might look very different. And I think in class we should talk about what that might look like. So remind me. So just another kind of subcategory, social issues, planning and aging. How will an increasingly large elderly population affect planning? Um, if you've got a growing population of older folks, which we do, they have different housing needs, right? You're talking one person, maybe two people, not a whole house full of young kids, not a whole big family. So they have different housing needs. And we're going to really start looking at public transportation differently. So, I mean, think about like a grandparent that had their car taken away. You can't drive anymore because it's not safe. Well, these are people that would be looking to use public transportation then. So it would change the way we think about it instead of public transportation maybe as being just for people that can't afford it, is in like this kind of cultural thing where you think that well people take the bus because they can't afford to buy a car, right? So this is going to kind of change our perception of public transportation, and there's different ways to plan for that. So the main point here, um, whether or not you self-identify as a social planner, almost any decision that involves how these big blocks of land are going to be used, how these huge sums of money will be spent, has social implications. So let's think about that, and let's definitely in class talk more about different social issues that are important to you and what that might look like in an urban planning context. There's a lot of them. This was just a really quick overview. There's definitely a lot more details we could go into about these different social issues and how they would influence planning, or when you're kind of designing your utopia. Are any of these issues important to you? Do you want to maybe address one of them in your city plan? So a lot of good stuff.